Well, welcome everybody. I would like to especially give a warm welcome to Ryan David Mullins, who is here as our special guest for today, talking about the metaverse. I'd also like to welcome Emma Slade, Yogesh Trivedi, and Laurie Hughes. So let me just start off giving a really short background about Ryan. Ryan is the CEO and founder of Aglet, which is a new spatial commerce game that combines virtual, social, and physical gameplay to reimagine the future of commerce. And most recently, Ryan has served as the director of future trends at Adidas. He helped devise the digital and innovation strategy for the company, as well as set up new innovative business models with business to serve the creative community. Ryan also has a PhD in philosophy and is currently writing a book called The Demand for Meaning, which we are all very excited to hear more about. But the reason why we're here today is because we are all very interested in the developments of the metaverse. And when we talk about the metaverse, we ask people, okay, what is it? There's a silence because nobody really knows what it actually is, and we would like to shed some light on this, and especially dive into the brain of Ryan today and get what he, with his experience in the field, understands what the metaverse is and what it is going to become or going to be developing into. So without further ado, I would like to give the word over to Ryan with the question, Ryan, what is the metaverse in your opinion?
Cool. Well, thank you for the intro, and thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to share some of my ideas. I've been thinking pretty deeply about a lot of this stuff for quite a while, and I think it's important that when we are thinking about this, as we talked about kind of in the opening discussion, that a lot of people seem to miss the forest for the trees when they talk about the metaverse or AI even, and they kind of treat these things as these technologies over there, and we're kind of over here theorizing about them, and they don't really take into account the way that the metaverse or even the internet, going back to a long time ago, where when the internet was emerging or the web was emerging, the ways in which how we design these technologies and these platforms ultimately end up impacting how we think about ourselves. So kind of our own idea of what it means to be a human being, what it means to interact with other people, and ultimately how we engage and move and live and move and have our being in the physical world out there. And so that's the perspective that I take when I think about the metaverse. And I guess I'll first start, just to help position anyone who's listening, I'll start kind of in the via negativa way of telling you what it is not. I think that what it's definitely not is that we all hang out in virtual worlds. That's kind of been the dominant view over the last, I guess, 3 years, which is really governed by the gaming industry. And it makes sense when this happens, because if we remember, when did the metaverse emerge? It emerged from a very specific, socio-political, epidemiological context, which is that we were in the middle of a pandemic. No one could go out in the world. And so what happened was, as entrepreneurs do, we started creating opportunities and spaces for people, virtual spaces for people to kind of live life. And this harkened back to the cyberpunk culture of the 90s. It harkened back to the Declaration of Independence of cyberspace, right? It harkened back to Second Life, Philip Rosedale's company, and kind of that whole thing in the 90s, early 2000s, of virtual worlds as the future of the internet. And so that kind of came back, and then you had it coupled with blockchain, crypto, and not only digital assets but cryptocurrencies, and this imagination of this kind of interoperative multiverse of virtual worlds that are all going to be interconnected, and we can go from here to there and kind of bounce around. And that was kind of the vision that was offered. And then you can raise billions of dollars, apparently, with this vision, hundreds of billions of dollars with this vision. And so you had that built up. But then when things come back to semi-normal, and it's arguable whether we've gone back to semi-normal, but when things go back to when we can enter physical space and cities, urban cities, suburban cities, and we're moving around in the world, I think the narrative around is the metaverse dead is really that what's happened is a loss of kind of, I think, hope or naive kind of utopian belief that the future of media, the future of brand, the future of just the internet in general is going to be based in virtual worlds. And so what entrepreneurs called a game just 2 or 3 years ago was all of a sudden called you're building a metaverse, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with a metaverse. It was just like everyone just kind of started saying that. And so that's what I do not think it is. So I'm very much in disagreement with somebody like Matthew Ball. I very much, I think he's completely wrong on his view of the metaverse. I don't think that his view changes everything. I just don't think that's right. What he's suggesting. My view of the metaverse is that he's not completely wrong. I think the metaverse should be viewed more as a spectrum. And I think that on the one side, you will have, let's say VR or, games, virtual environments. But on the other hand, on the other side of that spectrum is something like, let's just call it AR. And I don't mean augmented reality in the sense of like you hold up your camera and see a Pokemon. I mean it more in the sense of that reality is augmented by computational resources. And so I think when we look at it from that perspective, the metaverse is a spectrum like that. But the crucial question is how you design experiences when it's about movement. So I think how the internet and the web is developed has been Web 1 was really about how do you make pages machine readable so that you can apply algorithms to them, right? And then ultimately kind of aggregate attention and then advertise. Google won that. And the dominant compute model there was monitor, mouse, keyboard. And you literally went online and then went offline. There was a very clear distinction between those two things. The second phase of the web was, I think, what Facebook won. And that was a mobile social cloud compute model. And it was how do you make people machine readable, right? And how do you apply algorithms to them to ultimately aggregate attention and then advertise? But the business model there was the same. So you had Facebook in Web 2 kind of copying and pasting the Google model, but just applying it to a different data set, which is human beings. So pages to places. And I think Web 3 has nothing to do with blockchains, NFTs, SHMEFT, C3PO, whatever it is. I think it has nothing to do with any of that. It's all about the movement from pages to people to places. And the places is about movement. So in the spectrum I talked about, it doesn't matter if it's a virtual simulation that's designed of a game, or if it's me moving around in the physical world, it's about movement. And so software becomes more like architecture. And the interface of how we design experiences going forward has to take into account movement within space. And I think if we attend closely to what most of the richest companies in the world are doing and where they're placing their bets, Apple, Tim Cook calling himself a health company, I think it has a lot to do with health in the sense of movement, whether it's wearables, whether it's voice activation technologies. So I really think that what the metaverse is more of a design revolution in terms of how we blueprint, how we design, and ultimately how we regulate and legislate and release the new types of experiences that go in the future. And that will be very much about a movement from page design and kind of 2D flatness to a more spatial internet. So for me, the metaverse is a spatial internet, and I'm more bullish on one side of the spectrum, which is the idea of the metaverse kind of being this layer that sits on top of the physical world, as opposed to a destination that we escape to via some, headset.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for this very interesting view on the metaverse, which is, in my view, one of the first that specifically describing views of that is able to capture the experiences of the people that are using this. And it's starting off with the fact that you say what it is not, and thereby kind of killing 90% of the people's general associations, I guess,
Yeah.
with the metaverse is sharp and very, very, very good. I would like to give the word to Laurie now, because I think he has questions about the actual opportunities and also challenges about the metaverse, given to what you were just saying.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nina. Yeah, that was very insightful there, Ryan, especially giving your view on Matthew Ball's book that I read quite extensively. And his metaverse definition is cited quite widely, certainly academic literature.
Yep.
But coming back to the academic literature itself on the metaverse, a lot of publications have sort of taken a challenge-based perspective, and they range from privacy and security of users, perhaps fraud in the metaverse, and architectural challenges as well, building various metaverse rules, etc. Also things like addiction, protection of vulnerable groups, and there's been some widely cited incidents of reporters posing as children in various platforms and then documenting some of the abuse that they have received from various things going on in one or two of the platforms. But taking all that into consideration, how do you feel that designers, regulators, whatever, can sort of try and alleviate some of these key challenges looking forward?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, yeah, this is the really difficult question, right? With any kind of new, new type of technology platform that so seamlessly like integrates into the, well, it so seamlessly integrates into the platform that ultimately becomes like the polis. The public is just enabled, nudged, regulated by these technologies and these systems that, when you get this kind of classic binary of like, the entrepreneurial founder, creative, techno utopian, people that just want to create and don't want anyone to come in and regulate on things. I mean, we're seeing this most powerfully right now with AI and general artificial intelligence, and sort of like, okay, well, there was a piece in the Financial Times, I think yesterday or maybe today, about this, about meeting all these founders and seeing that actually in AI, what they're trying to do is create general artificial intelligence. And if that's the case, and what we think we know about what it will be, well then, maybe 100 people now are creating technology platforms that could ultimately, if some people are correct, be the ultimate doom of the human race, or less kind of sci-fi, although sci-fi seems to be more realism these days, but less, let's say, dramatic would be that these technologies ultimately end up, again, impacting how we think about ourselves, how we treat other people, and how we relate to the world around us. If you really think about the metaverse in terms of the compute challenges, you mentioned, the technological infrastructural side of things. If it's indeed the case that the metaverse is like Matthew Ball imagines it, and it's this just, we're all hanging out in virtual worlds. If you imagine the compute required to power something like that, even the compute required to power the internet as it is, but like, a Fortnite game with 20 million people in it. It's like, well, it wasn't really 20 million people all hanging out in the same world. It was all these these instances that were created. So the computational resources, the energy resources required for these things are also something to take into consideration, which were the same kind of ecological debates that happened around Bitcoin and mining, and why Ethereum moved into a different direction with its protocols, right? So I think that when it comes to the metaverse, regardless of where you stand on the spectrum that I mentioned, or whether it's, you think Matthew Ball's right or I'm right or we're both right, whatever, I think that what's clear is there definitely needs to be, some kind of openness to, especially from a founder perspective, which I am, right? There needs to be openness to how these things are implemented and how we can start designing technologies that really take into account, I'm going to reveal my Aristotelian background here, but take into account the virtues of what it means to be human, like actually having a perspective on that. And, there might be multiple different takes on that, but from at least from my perspective, having a take on what it means to be a flourishing human being, what it means to be in relation to others, and what it means to be in a city, in a place, and being a occupant of that place, that has a lot of normative consequences that should not only be defined by just the people who are building the company. And so I think that's why, we've kind of gone out of our way to try to interact with cities and local governments to try to figure out, how do we bring the city alive? How do we get people to, commingle together, to come together in a way that is, not escapist, but is more like, incapist. It's how do you go in? How do you engage? And so I think that when that happens, there are all these different things to consider around, ethics, about, data and privacy. And, with my game in particular, if you think of Pokemon Go, you think of Aglet, you think of, running apps, you think of fitness apps, you think of all the spatial data that we collect. Obviously, that's also very sensitive information in many ways. And so these are all things that need to be considered. And I think when we really think about a interface revolution in the way that I've described, it impacts payments, identity, commerce, social, and just media, to say the 5 food groups of kind of human culture. There's probably some more, but I'll just stick it at 5 there. All those things will change in ways that were very similar to how we saw all those things change over the last couple decades, right? And so I really do think that we are on the cusp of some massive, massive changes. And I think what we can do is learn from what we didn't do maybe the last couple decades, and maybe giving a little bit too much, hey, just go out and innovate and create. I think what's clear is that we're fracturing as a community, locally and globally. It seems like we're heading back to a world where it's going toward like multi-civilizational, almost, of like everybody's kind of building their own little tribes everywhere. I think you see this with Balaji in his book, The Network State. And so, yeah, I'm kind of rambling a bit now, I think, but I don't know all the answers, obviously. I'm definitely not a politician, though I've thought about it. And, I'm interested in exploring these things, and I don't have all the answers, but I think posing those questions and kind of in a Habermas way, trying to get as many people as possible together to talk through them is the way that we should be going forward, and, posing the most difficult questions that we can.
And just sort of an add-on, very quick add-on to what you just said then. So as being a contributor—
Did that make sense, by the way, what I said, or was that
Yes,
just—
yes,
okay.
certainly, yes, it does. But being a contributor in this space, an entrepreneur that's looking at delivering something in this space, would you look for sort of light touch governance? Would you prefer to see some kind of framework from government institutions to try and help you align your offerings? What would you think would be best for innovation?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so I think one really good example is health, both mental and physical health. So the nature of the game that we've created is that we incentivize you to get out and move, right? So sitting on your butt, staring at the screen seems to be a return in terms of a re-evolution back to a regression back to us being kind of curled up in a ball, right? So how do we break that cycle to get out and explore? And what we tried to do was, all right, no young kid is like, who's lived their whole life mostly online in these dopamine moments, just excitement, excitement, excitement. If you just kind of toss them out in the woods or something, which is kind of the like, hey, let's just get back to nature. Like, I don't think they're going to get that excited in the woods. And so how can you get people to move outside? And so what I tried to do and what my team tried to do was, how do you incentivize movement? And how we did that was we took a lot of lessons from Niantic Labs and Pokemon Go. We took a lot of lessons from some industries I'm interested in, like sneakers and streetwear, fashion, gaming. And we said, we think that we can incentivize behavior and health by creating this game that you can earn Aglet, an in-game currency, by moving around, by going to certain locations in the world, whether it's a retail location, whether it's a concert, whether it's kind of culture. You're playing culture and you're incentivized to play culture. Now, when you design that kind of an experience and you start meandering into places like health, and then you start seeing that thousands of messages from people who are saying, thank you, you saved my life. And we're like, really? The sneaker games, saved your lives. Like, yes, who knew that like just collecting digital assets, digital sneakers would be the thing that got me out moving. So a lot of like before and after pictures of people sending us pictures like, hey, this is me now, this is me then. Students who, during the pandemic were getting very depressed because they had to stay indoors. They were staring at screens all day in their education, stuff like that. Aglet was kind of the only thing that got them out as an individual to kind of walk around and move around for 30 minutes to play a game. And so the game itself is designed in such a way, and again, going back to the Aristotle and kind of teleology, is like, it's designed to get you to play life well. Like, how do you level up in this game, and including things like health? And so we have worked with a lot of institutions that are public health and mental health and physical health, trying to design experiences like this that help you level up and help you think about your health, right? And so that's just one example. And then there's a lot of brands out there that are doing really cool stuff in this. Like one brand's Mad Happy. It's an LA brand that does a lot of stuff in mental health. And then there's a lot of companies. There's a company called Unless that's Portland-based. The former CMO of Adidas, his name's Eric Liedtke. He was behind the whole ocean plastics parlay stuff that they did. He's doing really interesting stuff in environmental advanced materials that we've tried to connect with. And so, yes, we are extremely open to it. And given the way that I'm describing the future of software as movement and architecture, it has a lot to do as well with urban studies and urban design. So there's a whole side of it there to working with cities, which obviously would require working with, other institutions and governments. So I really think that the vision that I have of the future it's called ONLIFE. So I don't even use the word metaverse. I use the word ONLIFE. You're not online or offline anymore. You're ONLIFE. We just live at the intersection of those two things. And when it's the same thing, then you have to work with these institutions. You have to work with the regulators because it impacts every single facet of life, right? It's not like how they imagined it back in the day, the cyberpunks, where it was, hey, the corporations control the physical world. We're all screwed. Let's create this other realm that we all escape into. And if you remember the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, how it starts in that first paragraph is like, basically, F you corporations, keep the physical world. We've got software space over here. This is ours. But they forgot who owns the access to that space, right? Who owns the wires and the cables? And now you have Earth is basically this massive exoskeleton of wires. Who owns all of that? And so there's no choice. You have to. And I think it's the best way. It's the best way forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ryan. Nina, back to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Ryan. I would like to give the word now to Yogesh.
Yeah, very interesting conversation, Ryan. And you mentioned about kind of original conception about metaverse, like kind of multiverse, where people can move from one to other verse. So what do you think in next 5 to 10, 3 to 5 year and also longer term, how you see metaverse developing? Do you see that they would be able to achieve interoperability, or is it just a kind of nice thought, and it would never happen? Definitely, given your wider background, this would be very interesting to learn. Thank you.
Well, I'm definitely bearish on the idea of interoperability. I think, to say the least. I think there's some really serious technical infrastructure problems that would need to be solved to enable anything like that from happening. But I think more to the point is the business model side of things. I made this kind of, I don't know if to call it a prediction, but really it's just more like a random comment that I said, which may have been a prediction. I don't know, but I remember I posted somewhere that my prediction would be that there would be all these different instances of like metaverses or games, with the intention or the ideology being that, hey, we want interoperability. But then if they had a little bit of success, what we would ultimately see is that they would just build it. It would become their own little world, right? And so it kind of goes back to the browser war days of like, kind of before my time, but like Netscape and Internet Explorer, of like you had to build for one or the other, and then it wasn't until web standards came out that you had these basic protocols that you could kind of build for either. And so the idea of like these different metaverses having this underlying protocol infrastructure of standards that enable the kind of free flow of assets and money between them. Again, it's in theory, it sounds great. Sounds like a really powerful view of the future. And again, a very valuable one, or at least at one point it was very valuable. But I don't think that I don't think that's going to be where it goes. I think as we've kind of already seen, there's ebbs and flows to this entrepreneur game of building companies. And from my perspective, I think that's been a vision that's been around for a really long time, and we still don't have it. And if there was any opportunity to build that future, it would have been, the last, 3 or 4 years. I think similar with like VR, it's the same. It's like if there was ever a time where VR should be happening at scale, it would be now. And kind of jury's still kind of out on whether that's going to go there. So I don't think, for technical reasons, also from commercial perspective, that we're going to get this kind of interoperable, multiverse of metaverses that are all interconnected in the way that we have kind of the internet and different websites. I think that what we'll get, if we have anything like that, will be something like Roblox, or something like Epic Games, or something like maybe Apple, which again, kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? The usual suspects, the big companies that own all these resource power. And if you think of Roblox really as, these thousands and thousands of virtual worlds, and can you pop in and out of those? Easier to do when you're Roblox, but opening it up like that, I think it depends on too many miracles happening that I just don't see happening. And there's a saying in venture capital that if a company depends on more than one miracle, you shouldn't invest in them.
I think that sums up very well, and that's my own thoughts. I guess the technical barriers can be overcome, but the more, the power, the competitive advantage, and many other issues that is related to interoperability, perhaps those are much more harder to overcome. So from my perspective as well, I don't see the snow crash type, the metaverse happening so soon.
Well, I think a more interesting perspective is the interoperability between the virtual and the physical. You know, again, that idea of ONLIFE, of being, there is no, like, our color palette is like a purple, and you know, we kind of made the origins of the company of that color palette is, if you remember in the Matrix, when Morpheus gives Neo the choice of a red pill or a blue pill, and you know, the deck is like stacked against the digital in the movie, right? It's all that there's, everything here is a big fake. You know, Cypher's the idiot because he chooses the simulation. But if you have red and blue pill, my thought experiment was always like, what if Neo rejected the binary and just took both pills at the same time and swallowed them? And when you get red and blue, you get a kind of violet, right? So a kind of a purple color, and that's why our color palette is purple, because it's trying to bring those two things together. And the interoperability that I'm interested in exploring is, and by the way, every brand that we talk to, and this might be the death that you referred to, is a lot of brands are like, yeah, well, look, we tried to build these virtual worlds in Roblox or whatever, and they're popular for like, you know, a femtosecond, and then they're ghost towns. And what they're failing to realize is that when you build these massive virtual worlds, it requires a huge number of resources to continue to make those things alive. That's why games have thousands of people working on, right? You can't just be a brand like Adidas or whomever and like build a virtual world, you know? So really, I think, again, the metaverse and this kind of digital asset thing turned into a kind of brand casino game, where it was like, how do we use this opportunity to make some money really quick with this virtual asset, digital asset craze? And so I think what they're all interested in now is, how do we increase physical goods sales, and how is this other stuff really kind of top of the funnel to create, you know, desire and visibility, you know, get people to engage with our brand in a kind of, that's why I called it it's more like the mediaverse than it is the metaverse, that it just drives attention to whatever the brand tries to do. And then in my perspective, that's why, and this, what I'll talk about, I think in a couple of weeks over at Nina's classroom, is that you have to imagine that brands now are more like games. And you have to imagine the consumer is no longer sold to. The new consumer is a player that needs to be motivated. And so when you think of it that way, I think the interoperability we should be thinking about is the interoperability between digital as a dimension and the physical world, and how those two things go together.
That's very interesting.
Which is kind of a theory of everything, right? If you think about it in terms of, you know, physics, it's how do you connect, you know, Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics with a kind of theory and bring those two things together. And I think it's the same. How do you bring together the digital and the physical under kind of one theory?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And especially what you just mentioned about the new consumer, how we should perceive them. And given the kind of digital consumption is so much, I think that's very true. The nature of consumer would change, and also brand has to adapt to it. With this, thank you very much. From my side, I'm all done. Nina, over to you.
Thank you.
I realize I'm taking longer than like the 3 minutes that were allotted.
No, it's very, very interesting, and I would still like to give Emma the word here. I think she also has a few questions that she would like to ask you, Ryan. So Emma.
Sure.
Thanks very much, Nina. I'm going to kind of pick up, Ryan, on things that you've spoken about throughout the talk. So just a couple of days ago, I saw an article online titled RIP Metaverse, and it was positioned as this obituary for the metaverse, so picking up on the metaverse, you know, dying a death, and it was claiming that it was just a fad, the latest fad to join the graveyard of failed ideas, I think they called it.
Okay.
And we've seen these platforms and projects within platforms being shut down. We've seen people working in metaverse projects or teams losing their jobs. And you said at the start of the talk that there's been maybe a loss of hope or naive utopian belief. I think you said that the future is based in virtual worlds. And then in response to Yogesh's question just now, you were saying about, the new consumer and bringing the digital and physical together, and how brands kind of took this opportunity to try and make some money. So is the metaverse dead, or is just that version of the metaverse dead? And what could organizations like Disney and Walmart, who were really quick to try and get in on this, but have now kind of taken quite a few steps back, what could they be doing to get involved in what you've coined ONLIFE?
Yeah. Well, the whole, I could go it's tempting to go Mark Twain here with the old rumors of my death, but I won't go there. Let's use Nietzsche instead. I mean, if you think of like God is dead, is another one of these is dead sayings, right? And his point was not like, God is in the morgue and there's like a toe tag and it's over. It was that God for Nietzsche, it's still relevant and resonant within culture. So I think similar is a weird analogy there, but I think the same thing is true here. So if like RIP metaverse could be more like, realized in places metaverse instead of rest in peace. So I think that a company like Disney or Walmart, I think it's really clear for me how they could go forward in terms of ONLIFE. If you look at Disney and Disneyland in particular, the app for Disneyland has a map of Disneyland. So when you are the person or the player that kind of goes into this fantasy land and you're looking at all the rides, you're looking at, I know they're doing stuff with some other startups around avatars. So I think it's clear to me how map-based products or like GPS-based products are really, that's what I learned when I used Pokemon Go for the first time, was like, oh wow, that's the future of commerce. That's how media platforms are going to be, that fusion of digital and physical together. And so I guess the bigger challenge is, to my multiverse point, was like, it seems kind of lame if it's every brand and every platform doing their own version of it. And so my vision was like, well, what if that Pokemon Go wasn't Pokemon? It was just, Go. It was every brand, every IP, new and old, by the way, can start designing experiences layered on top of the physical world that go back and forth, that kind of be ambidextrous in terms of digital and physical in the experience itself. So for Disney, given that they have this an incredible IP with tons of different stories, how you make that playable, I think, is really interesting. And that's, I call it flavortizing. It's like a new version of advertising, really, is just like, how do you make the ad playable? And this is where brands become immersive and interactive, not because you're in a virtual simulated environment, but because I'm near Dusseldorf, and just 2-3 days ago, there was this huge cosplay event there. And so that to me is kind of like an immersion in media of these people playing these characters. So it's this 360 media where we're always immersed in it. I was in London recently in King's Cross, and there's, platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross station. It's like Harry Potter's like leaped off the screen and come into reality. And I think it kind of becomes more like a LARP type experience of how we design these, or even like an ARG. I think of how brands are becoming kind of opening up, brands becoming more about a space to play in as opposed to products. I think marketing is about products, but a brand is about a space. When you think of Nike, I think of a basketball court. If I think of Jordan or Michael Jordan or Jordan shoes, I typically think of those shoes on a basketball court performing at a really high level, right? And that's the marketing message behind it. So I think brands like Disney, Walmart need to really start reimagining the idea of the consumer being a player, and then thinking about their ecosystem of products, digital and physical, as like a story world, a place to move in. So if you have an app, you have a retail location, you have a website, you've got maybe content that you've created, you've got all these different things. How do you move in that space? And that becomes a lot like game design. So I think that's where things are going, is gaming is eating the world. Doesn't mean we all play a lot of video games. It means that game design and game mechanics are now fully baked into pretty much everything that we do. And we all kind of live the scored life now. And so I think that's kind of how these brands are going to start imagining how they think about their ecosystems as companies, digital and physical.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so obviously we almost done, but Nina has to go, so let's wrap up. Kind of, Nina, you have any kind of final remark before you can leave, and we can obviously then continue.
Well, I must say, thank you, Yogesh. I must say I'm super inspired. There's a lot of food for thought, I would say. The perspective of the spectrum is something that I think is extremely interesting. The way to portray consumers as players in the game that need to be motivated is something that me personally I find extremely interesting to think about, because in the end, what are we doing as people, and that we're still talking about human beings, right? And it shouldn't be the brands, the big players, the usual suspects, as Ryan said, that are in the end, shaping this new experience in a way that we are, sometimes forced to be part of. And I think this is something that is extremely valuable to think through and to let sink in. And I'd like to thank you, Ryan, for sharing this, because this is something that a lot of our viewers will probably also feel and experience like. So
Thank you very much. Apologies, I ramble sometimes, so
No.
I hope I didn't drift too far away from the core questions.
No, all these been very, very interesting, Ryan. And I mean, personally for me, what I have kind of gathered through this conversation, there are two things. First thing, there is a need to reconceptualize and change people's perception about metaverse, what it is. And what was presented was kind of a fictional form of metaverse. But actually it's not. It need to be seen in different ways, and some of those ways you have presented here.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And the second thing is obviously what people currently talking about, some media outlets, that metaverse is dead. No, metaverse is not dead, but one form of hyped form of metaverse, fictional form of metaverse is dead. The metaverse advances will continue. It's just that it won't be seen in such a hyped way. It will continue, and I have strong hope that in 10-year time we will see much better presence of metaverse. Currently we don't have that. So that's just my view. Emma, would you like to go for any remark?
Well, just thank you, Ryan. It's been really thought-provoking and made me think that I'm playing a real-life game of life, right? I don't know if you've played that game before, but yeah, just everything.
It's actually the tagline of the app is "Play Life." Yep.
Okay, so yeah.
Thanks for the endorsement.
You're welcome. Pay me later. Yeah, just thank you so much. It has made me think about how we start, thinking about consumers as more. Yeah, in a different way, especially. So thank you.
I'll pay you in FTX coin. Sorry, low blow.
Laurie?
Yeah, just to reiterate both what Yogesh and was saying, great to get different perspectives. And for me, the value add has been making me think a slightly different way about the metaverse. So I'm very grateful for that. And I like the sort of the realism, pragmatic aspect, the fragmented perhaps vision of what we currently have makes a lot more sense to me. So great, that's brilliant, and I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So With this, just want to say big thank you to Ryan, and it's been lovely conversation, very, very insightful, I would say. Not about just Metaverse, we got some other ideas as well, as Emma and Nina said, you know, new way of looking at consumers and brands as well, as you mentioned. So thank you so much, Ryan, for sparing your valuable time and sharing your thoughts with us. I'm sure many others will benefit from it, because still people are stuck with the same kind of view of Metaverse, which they've been projected since last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's just a fresh, it's such a fresh way of thinking it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Nina?
I just want to say also, if you guys, if you have any like criticisms or objections or anything like that, feel free to send them. Obviously, I'm always, you know, it's a conversation. I'm trying to, you know, work through these ideas as well. So any opportunity to see my blind spots and, you know, maybe some inconsistencies, I welcome those. So feel free to shoot over anything.
Absolutely, we will do that. Thank you so much, Ryan. And Nina, thank you so much for organizing it. And I know you are getting late, so if you like to say anything, please, and then we will end.
No, okay, I will just follow your lead here. Thank you so much, everybody, especially Ryan, for sharing your thoughts and your opinions. I'm happy to continue this discussion in different settings, maybe and very probably. And so I'm gonna look forward to keep in touch with you guys. And Ryan, we'll see each other very soon.
Yep.
And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.